Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. A group of foreign ministers arrive in Istanbul to discuss the ongoing situation in Gaza. A 32-year-old man appears in court charged with 11 counts of attempted murder after a mass stabbing on a London-bound train. And Prince William travels to Rio for the Earthshot Prize as he hopes to put recent revelations about his uncle Andrew aside. Now, a group of foreign ministers have met in Turkey today to discuss the next steps in Gaza. Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are among the countries represented in Istanbul. They're discussing the ceasefire and the humanitarian situation as they look towards the second stage of President Trump's peace plan. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue, who's in Florida for us, and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who's joining us from Surrey. Great to have you both on, Isabel and Esther. Esther, let's start with you right now and talk about how fragile is the US brokered ceasefire deal as we look at it between Israel and Hamas.
Well, this deal was always going to be fragile. This has been something that's been 2 years in the making, and this is the first time that this sort of cessation and fighting has actually held. So I think the fact that it's even lasted this long is a small miracle. Now, Donald Trump obviously insists that the ceasefire is still solid, despite the fact that you've had a brief sort of bout of hostilities that has left, according to the Hamas-run health ministry, 200 Palestinians dead. But by and large, we're seeing kind of this ceasefire being held up with duct tape and super glue and a bit of chewing gum. That being said, I think the leaders in the region are not being complacent, and they know that this could end at any time, especially as Hamas is slowly releasing, I think it remains 8 dead bodies of hostages. So once that happens, and it looks like the Hamas fighters have no basically leverage over the Israelis, there is a likelihood that hostilities could recommence again. This is why Turkey has taken it upon itself to arrange this meeting of regional leaders from the Muslim world that will play a pivotal role in what Gaza will look like moving forward. And we know that's certainly been President Trump's preference. He's wanted to have mainly the involvement of local leaders to broker any sort of long-lasting peace in Gaza and what reconstruction would look like. He's certainly not interested in having American boots on the ground or some sort of Iraq-like replay from 2004. But, you know, there has to be a consensus among Muslim leaders from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Indonesia, about what Gaza will look like moving forward. And this is why Turkey is probably best placed to do this, because obviously they are in NATO. They do have the ear of Washington. Donald Trump has been quite open in his praise for Erdogan. But at the same time, there has to be a consensus that all sort of Muslim leaders in the region are comfortable with, and they have to be able to draw lines in the sand that they can then use as a bargaining chip with Israel to broker a longer lasting peace deal.
And Isabel, as Esther said there, it is a fragile ceasefire deal. We know that, but actually somehow it's holding together to some extent at the moment. But Turkey has been so vocal about Israel. They have openly said that Israel was committing genocide inside of Gaza, and we've heard a lot coming from Turkey. But what are they hoping to achieve with these talks? There's so much we still don't know about the ceasefire at the moment.
I mean, there's so many probably egos at play as well in all of this. Let's not forget in geopolitics, because for President Erdogan, there is a huge opportunity here to cement his nation as a significant Islamic power in the region. And, you know, there's a lot of argument that will say that that's the right thing, that it certainly should be Islamic majority countries that are responsible for, restoring civilian and, basic utilities and the Palestinians sort of getting back on their feet should be led in this way. But let's not forget, this is also about power plays and positioning. And it will be very interesting to see, because of the outspoken criticism that has come from Turkey of Israel, but in the past also Turkey's fractured relationship with the West. You know, it's a bit love-hate. Sometimes things are good. We've seen Trump praising Turkey's role in accepting his peace deal. But, you know, the European Union have stalled any talks of Turkey joining for various reasons. And so they are difficult, fractured relations. And it builds on what Esther was saying, really, that there are, you know, this is a very tentative and tenuous alliance that's been created between, if you like, the Middle East and the West. And, you know, there are very testing times ahead, I think.
And earlier I spoke to retired Turkish ambassador Cengiz Firat and asked him if Turkish forces are ready to be on the ground in Gaza to help implement that peace deal. Take a listen to what he told me.
Yes, Turkey has been adamant from the beginning that there should be a ceasefire. And following a ceasefire, there should be a peace agreement. Turkey was one of the 4 countries that signed the agreement in Sharm el-Sheikh on the 23rd of September, if I'm not mistaken. And since then, we've been working very hard to get a group of the Muslim countries that were present in the Sharm el-Sheikh meeting, and 7 of them got together today in Istanbul. The idea is to make sure that the ceasefire holds, more humanitarian aid comes into Gaza, and the fighting should stop. I mean, since the ceasefire came into effect, more than 250 Palestinian people have died due to Israeli aggression that is ongoing.
So, Esther, we hear there about what Turkey is prepared to do in the future to make sure this peace plan is implemented in some degree. We're not even in phase 2 at the moment. And he mentioned there the ongoing attacks on the Palestinian people. We've also seen that in the West Bank of late during the olive harvest that happens there. The situation is still extremely tense, and no stabilization international force has even come into play yet.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, it's important to remember that this is probably the worst that Israel-Turkish relations have ever been since about 2006, really. Israel has made it very clear that they actually wouldn't tolerate, if there was some sort of international peacekeeping force, that any of that force be Turkish. That's how far the relations between the 2 countries have broken down. And it's quite clear that, you know, Turkey, since the start of this war, basically has taken a firmly anti-Israeli stance. They joined South Africa's ICJ court case against Israel as a result of kind of this anti-Israeli sentiment. And we have to remember that in terms of internal polling, it's actually quite popular with the Turkish public to be quite anti-Israel at the moment in the wake of the conflict in Gaza. And it's really helped boost Erdogan in local polling. So that's not a surprise. But that is why this summit is so important as well, because it's such a fragile and tense period. But we have to remember that before October the 7th, many countries like the UAE, for example, were open to the idea of normalizing relations with Israel. And we know that certainly from Jared Kushner and Donald Trump, that's something that the Trump administration would like to at least get back to. They'd like to get back on the trajectory where Israel can have normal relations with many of the Gulf Arab states and countries in the region more widely. So while Turkey has obviously taken quite a firm stance against Israel in this war, it's important for other players in the region that are going to be part of rebuilding Gaza to be part of this process, to at the very least temper Turkey's strong stance against Israel, or if nothing else, to make some sort of relationship with Israel in brokering a lasting peace and fostering the kind of trust that's needed to actually rebuild Gaza and to purge it of Hamas more quite rightly, but also the kind of very strong anti-Israel sentiment and the leaning towards sort of terrorist sympathies, to purge it out of the Gazan population, you have to have some sort of trust, which is why there has to be a unified bloc that has sway with Hamas, but can also say to Israel, listen, we're going to toe this fine line between bringing Gazans back to a sense of normality in their day-to-day life, while also maintaining the security guarantees which Israel and the USA would undoubtedly insist upon.
And I found it interesting, Isabel, you said to me earlier when we were talking about Turkey being a vocal voice and this meeting happening, you mentioned egos, and it made me think about Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is adamant the ceasefire is still in place. How important is it for the Trump administration to keep the pressure on Israel to make sure that this is successful?
I think at the end of the day, it's not just ego. I think it also boils down to money. There's a lot of money to be lost for America if Israel is not able to hold this deal and is not able to accept the terms. And I just want to pick up on some of the points Esther made there, which, you know, I think are true. But I think that there is this fine line to be walked between having some sort of relationship with Hamas in order to purge Gaza of those people with the extremist views in Gaza. But also we know that Turkey has a history of being supportive of Hamas. And I think that is why Israel has a huge problem with Turkey holding this meeting. They don't want any of their help with aid workers trying to get inside the rubble with hostage returnings either. So, you know, there is a lack of trust, and, you know, there is high stakes for everybody to try and make this hold. But, you know, there are serious issues around who can be trusted and what people's intentions are. But I think we are witnessing in this meeting an interesting diplomatic shift. And, you know, I think, you know, right thinking minds would have to agree that the future of Gaza has to be led by stakeholders in that region rather than America, for example.
But I also think it's interesting, and I'll ask Isabel and Esther the same question here. Isabel, you can go first. But I was speaking to somebody from Israel a little bit earlier, and they were talking to me about the threat to Israel because of the ideology that Hamas has brought to the Palestinian people, and how Israel would like to be able to live in peace in many ways and not be so frightened of that ideology. But it seems to me an impossible task to ever rid an ideology. And I don't know what you think, but of course, it's going to be very entrenched now as we into almost the third year of this terrifying situation.
Yeah, it is important to remember that Hamas was chosen to lead Gaza. You know, this was a democratic decision by the Palestinian people. And so Israel might not like that, but that was, you know, the destiny that they chose for themselves. And, you know, given the situation, and everybody must condemn the atrocities of October the 7th, and they were absolutely abhorrent and immoral. But what has happened since in the you know, the number of women and children specifically, in their tens of thousands, being killed by Israeli attacks and bombing, whatever it might be, will have only entrenched any radical views, surely, within Gaza, because they will have, and we have seen it there, you know, they've been accused by the International Criminal Court of using starvation as a weapon of war. We've seen aid being denied getting in, and we've seen horrendous conditions for years now. And so if you are somebody, a child right now, who has lost your parents, your family, your livelihood, your home, you've been moved from pillar to post, there will be deep levels of hatred, and that is a genuine security threat for Israel.
Esther, I don't know what your thoughts are on what Israel are scared of in the future with this ideology.
Well, I mean, the argument here is quite clear. You can't unthink an idea, as Margaret Thatcher said. And when you have a population that for the last 2 years have basically seen their homes destroyed, not unprovoked, of course, they understand what Hamas did was always going to call for some sort of retribution. But it's very hard to get this idea out of your head that this level of destruction and your livelihoods being completely destroyed is due to Israel. And there were top Israeli officials at the height of this war that were saying that despite mass casualties for Hamas, they're recruiting at a ratio of 3-1. Now you think, why are they doing that? Hamas is the group that brought this carnage and hell to their doorstep. But it's because of the appeal of this kind of narrative that Israel is the enemy, and that if I'm going to die, I'm at least going to die fighting for my dignity. I think the main trouble now is, other than rebuilding the lives of Gazans and giving them a sense of normality, it's also developing a healthy idea of Palestinian statehood that's not rooted in hatred of Israel or in the destruction of the Jewish state, and just basically having an adversarial tone to it, because that's never going to be conducive to any sort of relationship with Israel or the wider international community, and certainly not going to be conducive to state building. And this is where it's upon the international community and of leaders to have a more diplomatically creative idea of what a Palestinian state could look like. One that, of course, respects Israel's need for security and security guarantees, purging it of hateful figures like Hamas, but also creating a version of Palestinian statehood that's not rooted in hatred or adversarial politics, but more about day-to-day life and normality, and like caring for your children more than they hate Israel, as a former Prime Minister of Israel said. And that might look like really strong regional identities, like having mini emirs in the Palestinian territories that are solidified. The land boundaries are set in stone, and you're not going to see further encroachment from Israeli settlers, but having sort of strong local politics that puts the onus of regional identity on the people and their day-to-day lives, like education, like housing, like personal and familial prosperity, as opposed to an identity that's simply rooted in fighting the oppression and hating Israel.
Thank you so much, Esther and Isabel, for your thoughts on that meeting in Turkey today. But let's move on to another story. A 32-year-old man has appeared in court today, charged with 11 counts of attempted murder after a mass stabbing on a London-bound train this weekend. Anthony Williams was arrested on Saturday after an attack on an LNER service. A British train worker is said to be in a critical but stable condition. Here's how locals did react to that incident.
It will affect lots of people today. I mean, I've had family using the train line just the day before, so they could have been on that train easily. I've got a lot of family up at Peterborough as well, so we tend to use the trains a lot to get up there as well. And like I mentioned to you before, we use it to get into London occasionally as well. Yeah, it's going to impact a lot of people, this, for sure. But it's, not good.
A horrifying incident like this can actually make people think twice about the things that influence them and the things we glorify, like violence and things. It's absolutely unacceptable, and it's got no place in society generally.
Isabel, we just heard some thoughts there from some local people, but this was an absolutely horrific attack that unfolded in the UK on Saturday. What more do we know about the incident at this current stage?
Well, 2 days on, we've learned quite a lot more, actually. The defendant has appeared at Magistrates Court just briefly, sort of less than 10 minutes. But in that appearance, we learned that 32-year-old Anthony Williams was accused of 10 counts of attempted murder and a further attempted murder at a separate station in London itself late on Friday night, so early Saturday morning. This was at a Docklands Light Railway station. And we now know from Cambridgeshire Police as well that they are looking into 3 further incidents in relation to the attack. One involving the stabbing of a 14-year-old in Peterborough, and then 2 appearances at a barbershop, one on Friday evening and then one on Saturday morning. Now, the proceedings are active. There's a limit to how much We can speculate about whether these cases were linked or not. There's certainly lots of footage doing the rounds in some of the newspapers here in the UK. I should actually also point out that we learned whilst he was in court today that Anthony Williams also charged with assaulting a police officer. A broken nose was given in a custody suite to a police officer, allegedly. But quite a lot of developments in this case, and as you say, utterly horrendous. And just the witness testimony, to be honest, has been something out of a horror movie, because there is something about the way you are enclosed in a train. You know, you can't really even open, in fact, you can't open windows at all on those LNER trains. And the idea of these people all cowering and hiding in the buffet car, trying to protect, very sweetly, reports of incredibly brave members of staff and many men stepping forward to protect women and children has been really humbling. And I suppose the positive in all of this is when you hear those stories of heroes stepping forward also from the emergency services.
Yes, indeed. Horrifying attack. But like you say, there is some heroic stories coming out of what happened on Saturday. But Esther, this does begin to raise serious questions about the safety on the British transport network. Right now, we heard about this horrific attack. What do you think?
Well, I mean, this attack kind of hit home a lot for me because I've been taking that particular train for 15 years. So I'm very familiar with that train line, and it's really the stuff of nightmares. I mean, I genuinely was quite horrified when I heard of this, because I just thought, how many times have I been on that train to and from work or on various trips? And that could have easily been me. And it's not, I hate to say it's not surprising, but our public transport has been one of the areas that you hear many people, particularly women in particular, saying they feel unsafe. The incidents of antisocial behavior on public transport have been steadily increasing. I think in the case of Anthony Williams, obviously there's still a lot more about the case to come out, but we now know from sources, confirmed sources, according to journalists at the Daily Mail, that his mental health was an issue, and that apparently he was known to authorities for that reason. Now, we still have to wait for confirmation on what broader topic on what his mental health is and what mental health issues in particular they're referring to. However, what we're seeing, this is the third time a situation like this in the last 2 years has come in this kind of high profile nature, and a lot of the facts around this case fit into a pattern that we're seeing. So back in 2023, we saw Valjo Calacane, who was a black British national, a male, who went on a stabbing spree in Nottingham and killed 3 people, including 2 students at Nottingham University. Now, he did so a few weeks after going down to London to the offices of MI5 and begging them outside of MI5's office to arrest him because the voices in his head were unbearable. And actually, on the morning that he stabbed those 3 people in Nottingham, he was saying it's because the voices in his head told him to do that, or his family would be in danger. So that's the first example. And then last year, of course, we remember the case of Axel Rudikabana, who, to the British police's credit this time, they were quite forthcoming about the details of the perpetrator of this crime. But last summer, we remember in the immediate aftermath of 3 young girls being stabbed to death at the Taylor Swift concert, dance class in Southport, that it was a Welsh choir boy, which didn't exactly fit the kind of demographic profile you would expect. But anyway, Axel Rudikabana was also another person who couldn't have social workers even seeing him at his home without a police escort. He clearly struggled from severe mental health issues and severe antisocial behavior, and yet the British police force and the public security services dropped the ball. And it's looking like this case, this latest case of the train stabbing, is fitting a similar profile. And we're seeing a trend in British public services where there's a lack of honesty, or at the very least a shying away from certain issues when it comes to seeing certain acute demographic trends or certain issues coming from certain communities in the UK. So, for example, most people wouldn't know that black men in Britain are 6 to 9 times higher to suffer from schizophrenia than the rest of the general population. Now, this is a group of people that make up about 2% of the British population. So when you blow it up, it's actually quite significant. And yet most people don't know that. And that is not to say that our public health services are not adapted to targeting groups of people that present with certain illnesses or have certain higher prevalences of certain illnesses. So, for example, people of South Asian descent in the UK are twice 2 times more likely to suffer from diabetes. And the NHS's public health program has adapted to that. And we have targeted screenings, particularly higher rates for those communities, so we can tackle those public health issues. It's the same with multiple sclerosis. People of Northern European descent have a higher prevalence for multiple sclerosis. And our public health officials have created strategies to adapt to that. But when it comes to schizophrenia and mental health, particularly with Black men in the UK, this seems to be a gaping hole because you have many public health officials that don't want to seem racist or to stigmatize that group. But what's happening is it's putting the public at risk. It's affecting public safety, but it's also affecting the people that are most likely to suffer from this. And then you couple that with the increased use of recreational drugs like cannabis, which is known for causing psychotic episodes, particularly amongst heavy users, and then it's a recipe for disaster. So of course, this is a two-pronged issue of lack of security services that can adequately assess risks, like people coming onto a train and stabbing the British public, but also issues of public health concerns, and many people, like this individual that we will soon discover, falling through the cracks and not getting the adequate treatment that they need to not pose a threat to the British public.
And Isabel, right now, we just heard from Esther talking about mental health, talking about the lack of security, the lack of people and police and even armed officers. We don't see any of that in the UK. And let's be honest, knife crime is rampant in the UK. It has been going up. The stats are high. And it doesn't seem like anything's been done about it. Stop and search is something that the Conservatives are saying we should bring back.
Yeah, and for people looking outside into the UK, it really doesn't do UK PLC any good to be seen to be in the grip of this knife epidemic. I think there were 250 murders caused by a knife or a sharp weapon last year, and I think there were 50,000 knife offences according to the Office for National Statistics just in England and Wales last year. It's clearly a huge problem. I think what's interesting about what Esther is saying, and I am acutely aware actually of the high prevalence of schizophrenia in young Black men in particular. I think the issue is around the mental health services and the provision and the lack of funding in this country. I don't think the answer is more policing. I don't think we should be introducing, airport style security so that people getting onto trains are checked. I mean, just imagine the disruption and imposition that would cause to commuters who are already being, cattled class and on their way into work. It's miserable enough as it is, isn't it? That's not the solution. I think clearly this is a mental health problem, obviously tied to a violent issue. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think that Esther's absolutely right to highlight that issue. And I do think that we need to have more knife amnesties. I don't know why no one talks about that. There have been hugely successful amnesties in the past where people voluntarily give up their knives and you see knife crime being decreased rapidly. But something has to be done. And I think it has to be done in collaboration with what is quite clearly a medical issue as well as an issue. I don't think this is all about gangs. I don't think this is about radicalization. I think this is about mental health, particular cohort of young men.
Esther, I don't know what your thoughts are, but we spoke a little bit about Stop and Search before we did come on air, and that was hugely successful. And is this something that governments are shying away from because of the problem it had in the past when it came to different ethnicities and what that caused?
Yeah, I mean, this is a carrot and stick sort of scenario that we have to have. We have to have a carrot and we have to have a stick. Clearly, the British public or the British judicial system doesn't adequately penalise knife crime. So, it has been proposed that if you're caught with a knife at least twice, 10 years in prison, no questions asked, which I think is quite a strong deterrent. But that's just for the kinds of level of urban knife violence that you're seeing with young people carrying knives. Now, Stop and Search was so effective that in one in five stops and search that were done, it led to a police outcome, which if you know anything about policing, that's very successful. 20% hit rate is extremely successful. Now, of course, the politics has come into it, where you have people like Sadiq Khan, who introduced a ULEZ fine on old diesel vehicles and used the justification of racial justice as a way to basically fine motorists with certain types of cars £15 a day. So when you have someone like this saying, I'm charging you £15 a day because black and brown people are breathing dirtier air, even though there's no robust evidence that this ULEZ implementation has had a positive influence on air quality in London, it's very hard for him to turn around to then say, actually, the capital city that I have been running for the last almost decade has seen an increase in knife crime, which is disproportionately higher than the rest of the country. And yet he cannot talk about knife crime because it would look like he has no understanding of the kind of racial politics behind it, even though he has built a lot of his platform on racial politics. Of course, the argument should be whatever works should be implemented, and we should find other ways of reinforcing and strengthening police relations with communities. For example, like having police officers that are from the communities that they're serving within, as opposed to police officers that don't live in those communities. For example, there are many other things that have been discussed. But at the end of the day, we should be looking at what works before we look at the kind of shallow politics behind it. And on the mental health front, which is now what we're seeing rise in, even though it's usually lone actors and it's not very common, for example, like this knife incident on the train, it's still very terrifying for the public, and it causes a deep sense of terror and disquiet. And this is why mental health services and the provision of them should be so robust. If people feel like they're having manic episodes, for example, there should be a robust public health network that would see people on the same day, give them the medication and the treatment that they need. There should be widely spread literature, specifically to most acutely affected groups, in this case, Black young men, about what the use of recreational drugs like cannabis can have on mental health, about what resources are available, how quickly they can access it, and what kind of community resources are available to help these people lead as normal lives as possible, whether it's going to church, whether it's having a job in the local community, whether it's having access to extra education resources. I know young Black men in the UK that have had manic episodes, that have lamented at how slow the process is for them to get treatment. And it's thankfully, thanks to their families and the robust social networks that they live in, that they've been able to lead some sort of normal lives. But you will inevitably have people that fall through the cracks. And unfortunately, this is what we end up seeing.
Yeah, and can I just add to that, the strain on the public services is exacerbating all of these problems. There aren't the police that we want to see in order for the stop and search. There isn't the space in prison for those really deterrent sort of sentences. And there aren't the mental health provisions because the NHS is underfunded. And we're only going to see that get worse, I'm afraid, over the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Esther and Isabel. Let's move on now. And Prince William has travelled to Rio de Janeiro today for the 5th annual Earthshot Prize Award, focused on finding environmental solutions. The British heir to the throne arrives in Brazil ahead of COP30 later this week. Both events come amid further revelations regarding his uncle, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who was recently stripped of his royal title. Speaking on board Air Force One, President Trump shared his sympathy with the royal family.
I feel very badly. I mean, it's a terrible thing that's happened to the family. That's been a tragic situation. And it's too bad. I mean, I feel badly for the family.
Isabel, what do you make of what Donald Trump had to say there on board Air Force One?
Do you know, Leigh-Ann, when I saw that clip earlier on social media, I didn't hear the reporter asking the question saying, you're very close to the royal family. What do you make of all of this? And I just heard President Trump's response, which was, I feel very badly for the family. And I mistakenly thought for a nanosecond there, he was talking about the victims, the Epstein victims in all of this. And I thought, wow, that's a really sort of, significant comment that we're getting from him there. And then I realized there wasn't even any mention of the victims at all. And, I actually agree with him. I feel bad for the King, Prince William, having to clean up after Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. What a nightmare for them. But I did think it was sort of interesting that neither he nor Andrew made any mention of of the victims, which I think was a bit of a miss, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, as I said, I think for the royals, this has been a long-running headache. It sounds as though there have been huge constitutional obstacles that have prevented them from taking this action sooner. I'm sure they're really, really relieved at the way this is going, and will be very, very glad once it's finally done and dusted. And you can see already, Prince William, we've seen, is just arriving in Rio ahead of his Earth shot, which is this kind of like brainchild of his to sort of, it's called urgent optimism is the phrase he uses to describe it, because he's very pessimistic about the future, but he wants to try and help to find a solution. And you can see that he lights up when he talks about that. This is something that he wants the royal family to be focusing on, to be associated with. He wants that to be his legacy, not the embarrassing footage that we all saw of him at a recent royal family funeral with Prince Andrew trying to butter him up. And, if his face could speak 1,000 words, he said it all there in the sort of disdain and absolute fury for his uncle. But they will be very much hoping to draw a line under all of this embarrassment, and with any luck, be able to talk about a lot of the really good work that the royal family, to their credit, tries to do.
I did find it interesting when William was standing next to Andrew at that funeral, and the cracks could show the disdain on William's face. As you said, Isabel, was palpable. But Esther, what did you make of Donald Trump's comments? Because let's not lie here, Donald Trump knew Jeffrey Epstein. The Epstein files is something people have been talking about for a very long time, and that is linked to the administration.
Absolutely. And I think while it was quite obviously disappointing that Donald Trump didn't talk about the victims, I can understand why he doesn't want to touch anything Epstein related with a 10-foot barge pole, because even mentioning his name, he knows would have drummed up headlines. This is a man whose administration is still taking a lot of flack from his MAGA base for not releasing the Epstein files, even though those are one of the things that he ran on. And I think it's because he realizes that probably there are a lot of powerful men who you do not want to annoy around the world, who you will see very negative repercussions if the Epstein files are released and they had their names even associated with Jeffrey Epstein in any way. I mean, as things stand, Ghislaine Maxwell is serving a hefty prison sentence for trafficking young girls to apparently no one, because we haven't seen a single person that she is serving time for trafficking these girls to. So there's obviously a politics behind it. But I do agree that I do feel sorry for the royal family. I do feel sorry for King Charles for having to strip his brother of his titles in this way, and once again bringing a very sore subject to the forefront and having to clean up the mess that Andrew left behind because of his extreme lack of judgment and complete arrogance. That being said, I do think there should be a line in the sand that's drawn when it comes to his military medals. I do think that no one should be able to take your military medals away from you. Andrew did serve in the Falklands War. He could have lost his life in serving his country. And I think that kind of action should not be based upon whether you're in good public standing or not. And I think we have to remember this man is still saying that he's innocent. He has not been proven guilty in a court of law. I think he's completely sleazy and gross. But I do think there should be limits to this level of kind of mob justice, because you don't want it to go to the point of no return, where now military medals are just conditional and it's based on the goodwill of the monarch and how to kind of massage the PR machine for the royal family. I thought that with Prince Harry, even though I thought it was absolutely grotesque that he revealed his Taliban kill count, which many military officials said was an extremely poor taste, and they've never heard anyone, a serving soldier, having done that. But nonetheless, that withstanding, he did still serve his country, and I think that should be separate from monarchy politics. Now, I think on William going for the Earthshot Prize, I think, it's something he's always been very passionate about. I do think, though, just as a caveat, the royal family has to be careful. I think when King Charles was the Prince of Wales, he kind of got away with it for so long because he was the Prince of Wales for so long, and he crafted a role that gave him a bit of leeway. I suspect Prince William will be king in the next 5 years. You want to strike the right tone with it. You obviously want to talk about optimism and the future and taking care of the planet, which no one can disagree with, but also understand that, people are facing economic hardship. If you're a laborer in Botswana, you're not really interested in hearing a Greta Thunberg talking about not burning fossil fuels when you don't know where your next meal is coming from. So there can be a bit of a Western arrogance when it comes to talking about climate issues that I think the royal family should be cognizant of.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I think from Western countries, we don't always realise the impact that burning fossil fuels is needed in the likes of Southern Africa, where still electricity is not available to all communities. But Isabel, there's a lot there to unpack that Esther was talking about. Andrew's military medals. We know that the Defence Secretary in the UK is thinking of stripping him of these. I don't know how far they've got with that. And also just really Prince William becoming king and what needs to change.
Well, firstly, I completely agree with Esther that I think that, Prince Andrew's pretty gross and arrogant and, obviously denies all allegations against him. But I do think there should be a limit to mob justice. And I take no pleasure in what I think the tabloids are, quite frankly, using as a bit of a witch hunt because he's a hated figure. And we've seen people here in the UK, former politician Rory Stewart, for example, a famous podcaster now, coming out and saying this is an important issue, yes, but let's not all get completely fixated on Andrew, Mountbatten, Windsor. Let's not forget some of the other challenges that we face as a planet. And to Prince William's credit, we could talk about Western imperialist arrogance in trying to move on from fossil fuels, but the whole point of his Earthshot Prize is to come up with innovations to try and help people become self-sufficient and sustainable. And if you just look through the list of people that he's shortlisted to win that £1 million prize, those are rooted in community from all sorts of different countries, mostly countries that are underdeveloped. And I think he really doesn't get enough credit for this. I think it's absolutely incredible. And thank goodness some of our public figures are concerned about making sure that our children have a better tomorrow. It's so terrible as a generation what we are leaving behind in our wake. And whilst, to quote Esther there, a Labour in Botswana might not care about the planet, well, do you know what, their grandchildren might? And so, it's really important that these issues are talked about and that he gets the recognition that he deserves there. As for becoming king in the next 5 years, gosh, I don't want to put a time frame on it, but I agree with Esther. I think that the king doesn't look as strong as his mother did at this stage, but he's been dealing with cancer and all of the worries of the world. I hope she's wrong, but I think that when the time does come, Prince William will be a fantastic king.
Thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Esther and Isabel. Now, it's that time of the show where Isabel and Esther have chosen two of their favourite stories of the day. Esther, I'm going to start with yours because let's start with Timothy Chalamet. Apparently, I hope I've said that right, by the way, there's a look-alike contest for Timothy Chalamet. Tell us more, but I just want to say something. I had no idea who this guy was before he started dating Kylie Jenner. No clue, but he's an actor if you didn't know.
Yeah, that's the most interesting thing about him. He's an actor. That's dating Kylie Jenner, and that's probably why I was even interested in him in the first place, because I just found it interesting. He from the time I lived in France, he looks like every just an average French man called Pierre. But then I was like, oh, he's into women like Kylie. I just thought, people have interesting lives, private lives. But there is a group called Brothers Chalamet, which started out as a contest of young men that look like Timothy Chalamet. Basically getting all sorts of public perks. But now there's about a dozen of them, and they turn up at public events. They've kind of created their own mini brand, which is hilarious to me, because on the one hand, obviously this brand is dependent on the popularity of Timothy Chalamet, but on the other hand, it's just he looks like everyone else. He's not an inconspicuous looking character. So the fact that they're a bunch of young men that are feeding off the fact that they bear a mild resemblance to Timothy Chalamet is quite hilarious to me. And yeah, I don't know where people get these ideas. Like a contest, I've never heard of people doing like a Kim Kardashian lookalike contest or anything like that. But apparently he's the flavor of the week. So yeah, he's got his own fan club that also happen to be doppelgangers.
I love the fact that these boys have grouped together. Isabel, do you look like anybody? Could you possibly be a lookalike? What do people tell you?
Oh gosh, no, you tell me. I don't think so. I think I'm quite a unique one. I don't think I've got a doppelganger. What about you? Anyone confuse you for anyone? You've got a touch of Kylie Jenner about you.
Me? No. I'll tell you what. One day I was in out and about in London and someone called me Madonna, and I was horrified because I said I'm about 40 years younger than Madonna. I never got over it.
She's had a lot of work,
No.
to be
Back
fair.
in the day, Madonna was stunning. She was so beautiful. I mean, not now where she's like 60 years old and singing about random things and has more plastic surgery than Tupperware. But she was, oh my gosh, that's such a huge compliment. I always thought Madonna was gorgeous.
I think Madonna, and I also got Pixie Lott, but let's move on from that.
Yeah.
I can see that. I can see that. Yeah.
We move.
As well, yeah.
Esther, yours quickly. Look like anyone?
Me, Isabel. Oh, me?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't look like anyone.
Okay.
I don't think I do.
Well, I've got the most two unique beauties on. Isabel, I want to talk about yours because your story is all about a famous bear. Oh, our favourite bear, and he's making a debut on the West End.
Yeah, well, talk about lookalikes. The idea for Paddington the musical was actually thought up a decade ago, and it's been one of the best kept secrets in show business for a really long time about how they're going to do the bear and what it's going to look like. And they felt very, very strongly, the creators, that they didn't want Paddington to have a puppeteer on stage with him, which is very often the case when you do these sorts of things in theatre, because you can't tell a story about a lonely Peruvian bear, sort of alone and stranded in a busy London train station, if there's someone standing next to them. So they had a real headache, and it's taken them all this time. And they've come up with this really kind of fantastic but quite beautiful workaround. So they've managed to find a really petite lady to wear a bear suit, and I'm talking like 4'5" or something, really, really small. And she's been training by going in a sauna every day, dressed all in black because of the heat of wearing this bear suit day in, day out for 2 shows a day. And then she's teamed up with this guy. I should say her name, by the way. Her name's Arti Shah. And then she's teamed up with an actor called James Hamid, who's also a bit of a gamer, and he's remotely controlling all the facial expressions. Because if you think about Paddington, he's got the steely-eyed stare and then the bewilderment, and so he's controlling that remotely from the wings of the theatre, and then provides the voice. But they've got this synergy where they work so well together that it's the first time that Tom Fletcher, who's written the music for this musical, and he's of course the star behind McFly, but actually he starred as a boy, as Oliver in the West End. So he's incredibly talented himself. But the first time he met Paddington Bear, he burst into tears, which I just think is so lovely. So the secret's out, but they don't like to give too much away about how it all works, and they just want the audience to get swept up. And it debuted on Saturday night at the Savoy in London, and all accounts are that it's absolutely incredible. And we all just love that film, and we were talking about the royals and the positives of the royals earlier. I just always associate it as well with, do you remember that famous ditty where they had Her Majesty the Queen having tea with Paddington? He's just a British institution, is Paddington. And so I'm really excited. Hopefully I'll be able to get my hands on some tickets, but I might have to remortgage first because it's quite expensive.
But I must admit something, I've got goosebumps looking at Paddington Bear there because he's such an institution. I agree, Isabel. Gosh, I just loved him when he was with the Queen and gave her a marmalade sandwich. And just looking at those pictures there, I think I'd come back to London if I could also get my hands on some tickets. We love Paddington.
We'll go together.
Yes, that would be a great idea. Esther, come from Florida. We don't want to leave you out.
Yes, I will. I love Paddington.
Oh, thanks so much to our guest today, writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue, who is in Florida for us, and broadcaster and journalist Isabel Webster, who joined us all the way from Surrey. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson will be coming up next. Goodbye, and thank you so much for joining us.